the next 3 chapters are basically going to be more or less kind of scrunched together. Water, soils, and earthworks and earthworking resources. The reason why I like to kind of teach these together is that they sort of imply one another at different points. So rather than teach them separately, I kind of dip in and out of each of the chapters because at this point the subject matter seems to cater to that for me. It's all one topic. All right. So the topic of water is it's really central to everything that we're doing, because if we can't get access to water, we can't do anything. So the first thing to be clear about is, okay, exactly where's the water? And I think one of the things most people don't appreciate is that there's actually not much available water. From all the water that's on the planet, there's actually not much available water that we actually have access to. So to be able to get a clear picture as to exactly what we're coping with, or what it is that we're dealt in that regard, it's good to be clear about this, so that I think it gives you that much more appreciation, and there's that much more urgency. That's the work that's being talked about, the work that's being discussed, is that much more urgency and importance based upon the work. So if we break down the percentages of all the water there is in the world, all the water there is on the globe, there's only 2.5% of all the water on the globe is actually, but again, this is best estimate, only 2.5% of the water that's on the globe is actually fresh water. 2.5%.
That's a lot.
And then the breakdown is there's saline water, less than 1%, and then the rest of that is oceans, 96.5%. Now, when you start breaking down the fresh water, to see actually what we have access to, what we actually can make use of, that 2.5% can then be broken down as such. So of the fresh water, 1.2% of that water is actually surface water, right? Surface water or other fresh water. A little over 30% is actually groundwater, and then the 68.7% is frozen, although that percentage is very quickly dropping, right? The 68.7%. Of that percentage of the surface water, that 1.2%, the 1.2% can be broken down further. So you have 3% is in the atmosphere, approximately 1/4% is in living things. Half of that water, half a percent is in rivers. A little over 2.5% is in swamps and marshes, and a little less than 4% is soil moisture. So again, there's not much. A little over 20% is in lakes, and then just under 70% is in ground ice and permafrost. So we're talking about, in terms of the available water that we're talking about trying to work with, we're talking about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not able to, to manage that small quantity of water properly, then, going forward, we have very serious problems. Very serious problems. And it's important for us to keep the proper perspective as to what the nature of those problems happen to be. So, if you look at just some of the implications of what comes from this is, obviously, I think most of us should be familiar with the current refugee crisis. There's somewhere between, there's an estimate that came out, I think a day or two ago, that says right now there's 68.5 million people on the move. And one of the drivers is the fact that, these people don't have access to things like fresh water or functional land. It is largely a consequence of land degradation, which then in turn creates this unsettling situation with food and water insecurity. The strange thing is that only now in recent years that those connections are being made. So about 5 or 6 years, about six or 7 years ago, I started attending a conference in Switzerland called the Co-Forum for Human Security's Dialogue on Land and Security, where there's been a specific focus on talking about issues related to human security that are connected to the condition of land. And the fact is, this has only been seen as being kind of worthy of actually having a gathering where people talk about that phenomenon, specifically in relation to human security, is actually kind of amazing. Because again, this has been the driver of most of history, is that the conditions of landscapes heavily influences or determines human outcomes. So outside of the current situation we have today with the 6.5 million people, that's now seen as being, that's eventually going to turn into upwards of 130 or 150 million people by the time we get to mid-century, if not actually before. It's probably within a decade or two that we're going to see those numbers. You have countries that are experiencing what you call zero-day water crises, meaning there are places that don't have enough water for their citizens. Like if you live in a city, one of the most startling is probably Cape Town, South Africa. So Cape Town had announced that they had a 0 day that happened sometime, I was either late spring or maybe early summer, that they now have everybody showing up to specific locations in the city to bring containers so they can fill the containers with water so they can use it every day. So they're not actually having water directly, it's not sent directly to the house because they don't have it. They don't have it. There are places like this in America, there are places in the Central Valley of the United States, because of, they had a decades-long drought where now they're having to pump groundwater to the point that in some places it's simply not there. So they have to bring in bottled water. So this is a really serious issue. So you can see here the zero water day even touches places here in Spain, in particular in the south. And so Spain, Morocco, India, and Iraq are at risk as dams shrink. You see these reservoirs and storages of water shrinking. This is 2013. It's 2017. Wow. It's 4 years. Can we see that again? 2013, 2017. Wow. 4 years.
Which country?
Yeah, this is Morocco, yeah. Al-Masira Reservoir. So that's, again, 4 years. You have some of the largest bodies of fresh water on the planet that have basically been completely run dry. Probably the most well-known and most significant would be the Aral Sea in Central Asia. The Aral Sea was the 4th largest body of fresh water on the planet. And it's basically been run dry by trying to irrigate cotton.
Yeah, no, I read another article which showed that this is a phenomenon that's happening globally, that all the lakes are disappearing. You can forget about shrinking over the last 20 years. They're just completely disappearing, the large bodies of water, which are now land rather than lakes.
Right. So the linkage, though, in looking at this, and this is a graph of, again, the amount of water, the surface area covered over time. So you can see how much has dropped even just in the last 6 or 7 years. But what you again begin to see is the condition of the lakes and the ability of surface storage of water to recharge is heavily dependent on the condition of land. That the two are not mutually exclusive. One determines the outcome of the other. And so the more land you see degrading, the more you see these situations with with water storages around the world becoming more tenuous. Here's a Mosul Dam in Iraq. This is a 12-year period. You can see how the levels change, and then you see these drops, especially in the last, probably 3 or 4 years. But this type of erratic storage, this is in India. So, Indira Sagar Dam. This is in Spain. Buendia. Decades of drought, a global tour of 7 recent water crises. So, you can see, again, the present situation around the globe where we're having more of these, these serious issues as far as supply and availability is concerned. So, if you go back to that first slide I showed in terms of the actual amount of fresh water there is, again, the amount of fresh water there is and the amount that's actually available that we have access to, it's reflected in these stories. And you'll see, if you do a search, you'll see more and more and more of these stories about the serious situation globally. Let's take a look at a few more. It's Decade of Drought, a global tour of 7 recent water crises. Northern India's groundwater loss can be seen from space. 54% of India faces high to extremely high water stress.
How is water stress defined? Is it just having too little, or?
I guess technically how they would characterize it, you have to look up the standard definition, but basically it would relate to the ability to have recharge in relation to rate of extraction and usage. So again, it's like your bank account. In most cases, places are taking out more than they're putting in. And so this obviously is going to have, far-reaching implications if this is extended over, a long period of time. I think one could, anticipate that as climate becomes more predictable, as land continues to degrade, and as populations continue to grow and the rate of usage increases, that it's going to be more difficult to predict how that's going to end up turning out, going forward, and whether or not you are going to have enough, water for the growing populations around the globe. Here's Brazil, and obviously you can see most of the usage is in the population centers. Yeah, so here, Atlantic Ocean circulation at weakest point in 1,600 years. Now, what does that mean in terms of prospects for water or precipitation? What do you think that means?
Sorry.
Well, yeah, it's probably say that like kind of a generic statement, yeah? It's bad things. I mean, but in terms of what is it about the circulation of the oceans that is particularly concerning? Amen.
So it helps to stabilize the climate that we're having and protect the oceans, and it's in the end enabling us to live in this temperate and moderate climate as we're living. So if the circulation changes and the Gulf Stream and the streams change to the direction to whatsoever, everything is going to be destabilized.
So related to the fact of rising sea levels, if you don't have the circulating back out again, it doesn't counteract that action.
Next.
The release of moisture in the atmosphere, like evaporation and the rain, that's caused by the streams because of the difference between warm and cold water.
Right. So that point, the fact that you have the temperature differences right? You have the fact that you have differences in temperature not only at different points of the globe, but also differences in temperature at various depths in the ocean as well. So it's not only a matter of, you know, the circulation kind of along the surface when you have different geographical locations that have different climates. You know, as you have the water, as oceans become warmer and warmer, and you have more and more warm water at deeper depths, you have that much less circulation. You have that much less circulation. The way the weather moves, it doesn't move like it did before, right? So again, the predictability becomes that much more of a problem, and it becomes a problem, especially when you have people that have lived lives based on their ability to predict weather, right? So, for example, if you're a person who tends livestock and you are following the rains, what if you don't get the rains that you used to get or that you've been getting for generations? Then you have to go farther away to actually find places to browse your animals. So, you know, there are regions of the globe that 70% of their economy is based on the trade of livestock. So, if you're no longer able to do that, you know, and you have animals dying off in huge numbers because they're not getting, you know, the water and the feed that they need, and the temperatures are crazy, and again, it's a great deal of disruption as far as what's happening with people.
Is it Boko Haram operating in which country?
Nigeria.
Nigeria. So there's actually now with the kind of stress that's being put on herders in the kind of north of the country,
Yeah.
having to travel further south. There's more violence coming from that stress of those herders traveling into lands they wouldn't then actually. The problem with Boko Haram.
That's precise. Yeah, it was funny you mentioned that story because you mentioned that because there was a story that just came up about 2 or 3 days ago about that situation in northeast Nigeria. So basically, the headline: Northeast Nigeria threatened by critical food insecurity. Almost 3.8 million people will face critical food insecurity, and 7.7 million will need life-saving assistance this year. And again, that feeds into the whole Boko Haram thing, and it has a lot to do with exactly what you mentioned, that we're just seeing a new version of a very old problem between different communities of people. You have people that are sedentary, they've kind of settled into a very sedentary type of lifestyle where they cultivate land or they live in cities, and then you have people that still move and there are itinerant populations. And when you have people that move coming up against people that don't move, right, that you start having conflicts about how you're going to figure out how land is supposed to be used. And so those types of things become more and more pitched, and you can see this playing out in different parts of the world, like different conflicts, whether it's South Sudan, or again Somalia, or Nigeria, or places in the Indian continent, the Central and Southern Asia. Same problem, but playing out in different guise.
I do think that the situation up here, at least in Nigeria, is a little bit different in the sense that Boko Haram just wants to get a caliphate, and they're very.
But it's not to do with Boko Haram. It's to do with herders.
The new people that they are facing.
Yeah, I'm going to just
Boko Haram. That's
just before this go, because I can see where this is going to go. Yeah. Just before we get into this conversation, I just want to, we can talk about that, but not here, because that could be a very involved conversation. The interesting thing about a lot of that is if you talk to people from the region, and I've had a chance to talk to people from Nigeria that are in the middle of that, it's not what is, that conflict is not what most people are made to think it is. Just like the conflict in Somalia, for example, over the last 25 plus years. Like people are made to think that it's something that in fact it is not. Just like the issue of piracy, for example, in that country. Piracy is a very interesting choice of words. The piracy issue actually arose originally from the problem of dumping. That there was a massive amount of dumping in Somali waters, some of which was the dumping of hazardous waste that was washing up on the shores, People were trying to figure out what this stuff was and where it was coming from. In the course of contacting it, there were people who were getting sick because in some cases, either the waste was either medical waste, it was hazardous waste, or in some cases it was radioactive. And they happened to be things that were being dumped in the water coming from Europe, funnily enough. So people started going out to find out, going to see where it was coming from, who was putting it in the water. And so essentially it began as, an effort to try to get some kind of protection of the coast. And then eventually it turned into sort of a criminal racket, so to speak, because people realized that they could make some money if they can get control of the ships that were coming through the shipping lanes there. But that's not what it started off as. It started off as a problem that arose because there was either the dumping in the regional waters, and then another issue was poaching of fish. Poaching the fish, which is a massive economy. It's like $250 million annually, which is a lot of money, in a place that is consistently malnourished and doesn't have much of an economy. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have, but you got to be very careful about the narratives that are often offered as explanations, because there's a lot more happening underneath the surface, and that by no means is an endorsement of what these people are doing, but the explanations as to why those situations are what they are, they're a bit more nuanced than I think many of us appreciate. But just understanding the seriousness and the current state of affairs, concerning this whole situation with water. Again, this hopefully establishes the urgency, as far as trying to seriously put into use some kind of sensible way of designing and managing a resource that's becoming more and more difficult to get access to. So there's I want to go back to some of what I was just describing with in the last set of slides. Some of the work of Brad Lancaster. So Brad's been kind enough to list for us a set of rules, so to speak, that are very useful in being able to design or set things up for best use of water, of available water. Just for a reference, and so you guys know, Max, meet Ringo. That's Ringo up there on that big bulldozer. So if you end up going to Tasmania, this is the guy you're going to be dealing with. Right?
Now I know what the machines you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's introduce yourself to a D11 bulldozer. So, so this is a basic overview of how water and earthworking come together. So there's a set of basic guidelines, rules, and principles that covers how we go about applying this to design. So earthworks, this whole topic, earthworks are necessary and ethical where they allow us to reduce our need for energy, they diversify our landscape for food production, they permanently rehabilitate damage, and they save materials, or they enable better land use or help reestablish vegetation. Now all of this again is in reference to reshaping landscape so that we can maximize or optimize our access to water, especially if you're dealing with a place that is already degraded and not in very good shape. And I know there's been, in some of the discussions here, sort of a reservation, some reservations about the use of certain tools or going about making changes in places. The change is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not assumed to be a bad thing. In some instances, changes are very much welcome. And I think the ability to be able to have tools and methods that allow for us to be able to change landscapes so we can get better use from them, get better function from landscapes that's an important possibility and opportunity we need to take advantage of. So in moving through this, rainwater harvesting with earthworks. Earth can be moved for productive reasons, many of them classifiable as landscape restitution. So there are many examples here. To terrace hill slopes or for stable paddy crop or wet terraces or gardens. And one of the things that immediately comes to mind is if we look at the work surrounding the Los Plateau watershed restoration project or rehabilitation project. If you look at Sepp Holzer's work, this is very much a feature of his. It's a lot of what Jeff's work is made up of. And again, these are very old ideas that we see at play. We saw it in the example of the Hani people in China, how they were able to again change landscape to make better use of water. Second here, to drain or fill areas. And this is to direct water flow or runoff. And you'll see this in the use of diversion drains or spillways, all a variety of different methods that are used to either move water or allow for the filling in of water in places. To make holes for any number of reasons of greatly varying sizes, from fence posts to dams or ponds to wells or to deeply drilled bores. You'll see this with the use of the Zai holes, for instance, with Yakuba Saladogo's example. Or the Valarani plow, which is sort of a mechanical version of the same idea. Is making, again, these widely distributed areas where you've made small basins, an array or a system of small basins to be able to better distribute and make use of water. 4, to stop erosive forces carrying off soil. So this would include various types of soil conditioning and erosion control. And 5th, to permit recharge of groundwater sources. This would include ripping, which would also kind of, I think, fall in the category of soil conditioning, and the use of this thing we call a swale. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Let me just move that, sorry. Tell me when you can see it.
Yeah.
You see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, and I think it's important to make sure that there's a clear delineation between, again, the two different kind of potential ways of managing water at work. There's something that, there's impounded water, right, which is sort of the storage of water in a sealed feature, a contained feature. There's the impoundment of water and there's the infiltration of water, right? It's putting water below the surface of the ground, right? So depending on what the goal is, these two possibilities of impounded water and infiltrated water, that's going to determine what technique is used, right? So for example, swales are not an impoundment feature. They're actually not made to keep water at the surface. It's actually made, it's something intended to allow for water to eventually infiltrate into the ground. A dam, right, or a reservoir is a sealed feature that's intended to keep water at the surface. Right? So the two different things, and I think they're often confused. They're often confused as being sort of used for the same purpose.
I was wondering at the site if the top pond was impounded that way, or would it be infiltrating slowly?
Well, if it's a dam, if it's a surface storage, it's supposed to be impounded, right? So usually when a dam is put in, what makes a dam, quote unquote a dam, this is not to be confused with, what most of us think of when we hear that word, is that it has to be sealed. So usually, when a dam is built, the thing that determines whether or not it's even possible for you to put it in is if you have something that can be used to seal it. Typically, you're looking for, you want a certain amount of clay in the soil. If you don't have clay, then you have to go and find something else to seal the dam, and that can be very expensive. So this is why it's really important for you to understand where you're operating, because if you're in a place that has the soil doesn't have much clay in it, then it becomes very difficult for you to, to actually put the dam in and have that be a way of storing water. So there are a number of principles that we're not going to take a look at, and they're actually very similar to the permaculture principles. These principles for successful rainwater harvesting. So there are 8 in number, and I think it'll be really useful for you to be able to actually take these down and then do a compare and contrast of the permaculture principles in relation to the principles for successful rainwater harvesting. So the first principle is, it should look very familiar, begin with long and thoughtful observation. Okay, begin with long and thoughtful observation. Observe where the water flows, where it collects, where it drains away, and where it drains from. Right, so you have your incoming and outgoing water, right? And then again, where it tends to want to sit. This informs your resources and challenges. Right? Just being able to observe these things. What's working? Right? What is working? Whatever is working, you build off of that. Whatever is not working, you change it. Right? And it's a continuously iterative process. I think one of the you can see there's a figure that goes along here. Right? You don't necessarily need the blackbird to happen, it might help. So for example, if we look at the site, at the site in its current form, and it was interesting being able to walk, like specifically go see the swales that had been put into place, and then how they were able to perform, and really what is that's the first wet season. That's the first rains that those features have been in use. So it was interesting to hear from him, because he's been here since, I've always been here since January, right? I think that's what he said. So he's been able to he's specifically here to observe what's going on with the swale features. So one of the things he said was that the swales filled up, and actually I think they were overflowing after only a 14 mm rain, which is really not much. So immediately that seemed to indicate to him is that the swales that are currently in place actually need to be bigger, because right now, at the current size, they aren't really able to manage the water that is showing up at present. It's not able to really handle the quantity of water, the volume of water. There's another portion of the site where the way that the swale is laid out, and then the swale orientation, like the way that it's actually set up in relation to where some of the other earthworking was done, specifically some of the ripping, right, was almost perpendicular to one another. So you had a portion of the site where the area that had the ripping was done, the rip was parallel to the road, but perpendicular to the swale. Now I think someone mentioned that this was probably may have been done intentionally. But the problem now that you're starting to see in the swale is that the swale is filling up with silt. So when it rains, the runoff comes off the road, it goes into the furrows of the rip, and then the water flows into the swale, and then it's now not as deep as it was. And so now you're seeing that the silt is now filling up the swale feature, which means that the next time it rains, it's not going to be able to hold as much water, and then it's going to end up going over the berm and the swale, and then you're going to see more erosion, and that's exactly actually what you see on the downhill side of the swale. There's now a more pronounced erosion going down the slope. And so these are the kinds of things that you need to be aware of, because it might be necessary for you to actually make changes to the first iteration of the design that's been put into place for water. And so again, adjustments need to be sometimes made once you're able to see what's not working or what could work better.
Would you say that in terms of where those swales have been used, that if the purpose of the swale is to help water to infiltrate, then it needs to be done in conjunction with further infiltration methods, but like, and that can simply be ripping on contour.
Right. Right. So, for example, instead of doing the rip in relation to the road, what if we did the rip in relation to the swale? Right. So the swale ends up becoming the guide feature, and not the road. Now, why the swale instead of the road? Well, precisely because of what we saw with the current setup, and then you implement whatever measures will allow for you to be able to make best use of the water as you move to the bottom of the watershed. So we can see an example of this. In Brad's figure, he uses a house, right? So if you have just a simple housing site, a standard sort of suburban type setup, the top of your watershed is the top of your roof, right? And then the bottom of your watershed is the ground. So you design, right, starting at the top and work your way down to the ground. How do you best capture water in this particular setting? Now, if you were to apply this, say, to a valley, or a larger landscape where you actually have more kind of larger quantities of water and more opportunities to be able to capture it, you're going to work in a different way. So, for example, if we look...
Is watershed just the body of water?
Watershed is the area, right? The total area that is actually having water enter into it and move through it.
Okay.
Right. So if we look at, let's look at sort of an idealized watershed just to get a look. Let's see. And I think it's really useful in looking at it from this perspective. Here we go. So we go take a look at one of the figures in the book. This is actually towards the beginning. If I remember correctly. So this is sort of a very simplified representation of kind of the standard valley. Right, so you can see here, you've got, right, this is a valley, and basically the way that the water would move through this setting, again, without anything to capture it, is it goes from the source, the top of the watershed, down to the bottom of the watershed, or what we call the sink. Right, so it's basically a straight line. What we want to do is we want to create as long an edge as possible. We want to create as many places for this water to travel and contact. Right, we want the water to travel the longest distance over the longest time, contacting the most elements in the most passive manner possible. Okay? The intent or the goal is for water to travel over the longest distance, over the longest time, right, contacting the most elements in the most passive manner possible. And it's important to have each of those things highlighted, because if you don't have water moving passively, then that water can be extremely destructive. And I think actually we saw in one of the earlier figures from the other day that flooding, for example, is responsible for, I think, most of the deaths attributed to natural disasters than any other cause. And again, that is the result of the destruction of which is from water moving too fast over too long a distance over too long a period of time. So here we have idealized valley. Here's the contour, right? So those lines are supposed to be contour lines. Contour lines indicate that all of the points on this line are at the same elevation in the landscape. Same elevation, which means if you had a feature, say you had a ditch, like a swale, that was dug along that line, right? At every point in this line, as if water was flowing down the slope, again, which is perpendicular to the contour, it would just sit on that line. It wouldn't flow, right? It would go on one side or the other because it's all at the same elevation. Right? You need a difference in elevation in order for you to actually have water flow. Okay, so who doesn't understand what a contour is, what a contour line is, or what the idea as applied to landscape? Okay, so contour, C-O-N-T-O-U-R, contour line is basically a line or a position in landscape. If you were to follow that line, it could be obviously a sort of a hypothetical line drawn, or it could be a literal line in the landscape, and all of the points on that line are at the same elevation, right? At the same height in relation to the ground. So that means if you were to walk all along that line, you would not change position in relation to elevation. So the contour becomes a really important measure of how we manage water and how we think about earthworks, because the goal is to hold water as high up in the landscape as possible, right? As practically possible, because then that allows for us to make use of gravity. So here we look at this particular figure. This dotted line, what do you think the dotted line is here? What's the dotted line supposed to indicate? Key point, right? The dotted line indicates the key point, right? The key point is, what's the key point again? Say it again?
Where you should build your house?
Where you should put your house.
Halfway.
There's a better way to define it. What is the key point? Rachel. Right. Key point is a transition point, right? Key point is a transition point. It's the transition from where land becomes convex and it changes to concave, right? It's convex to concave. And again, the significance of that convex to concave change is that gives you an indication of where it's practical for you to begin thinking about how to position storages of water on a slope. Right? On a slope. And again, if you can place it on a slope, then you have, relatively speaking, you have an opportunity to make use of gravity. Now, if we look at how this valley, this watershed, could be arranged differently to be able to lengthen the amount of time that it takes for water to move through it, instead of it being a straight line, right, direct from source to sink, here you can create storages as it moves from high to low. Right? That if you create different places for water to be stored as you move down through the watershed, then it presents for you a number of opportunities to actually have storage and to hold water over a longer period of time. So here you have as a combination of different storages. So generally speaking, we have a few. We have a few that we can use. We have soil storages. Right? You can store water in soil. You can store water in biology. You have biological storages. We have infiltration through earthworks. We have tanks. And we have ponds and dams, reservoirs, surface storages. And so we have about 4 or 5. And then we also, again, the infiltration can be done by way of swales, ripping, pitting, right? All these different ways that we can allow for water to get below the surface. So describe the storages here in the picture. What are the storages? I mean, some of them are quite obvious. Yeah, ponds, obviously. So you have ponds here. So all the dark figures here are supposed to be ponds. The lines connecting the ponds, yeah, actually these are supposed to be what we would call diversion drains, which are essentially like swale features, but they're not on contour, they're slightly off. And the reason why they're slightly off is so that you can actually get a bit of a flow. Right? So the ability to actually have water flow as you're moving from the high part of the watershed to the low part of the watershed, that's what comes from surveying. And surveying specifically with what we call a fall. Right? So you can have a change in elevation over a relatively long distance. So for example, you could have maybe a change in elevation of a meter, say over 1,000 meters. So as it travels 1,000 meters, it's going to change 1 meter as it goes from the beginning all the way down, again, further to wherever it's supposed to be traveling to. So that's what allows for there to be something of a flow of water. I'm sorry, Toby.
That's just what I wanted to know, like what kind of gradients freelance did.
Yeah, I mean, again, the gradient could be any number of things. It could be 1 in 300, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 2,000, depending on, again, what the intent is. But the idea is you can actually induce that flow if you survey in a very specific way. Sorry,
Same question. Same question.
okay. So the arrow is supposed to be indicating flow. Okay. Right. So the water moves from storage, it overflows, it goes into the drain, fills up this storage, overflows, goes to the next. It goes into the drain, goes to the next storage, and it continues to go from top to bottom. Right. All of these dark features here are storages, different types of dams. What other storage do you see here? Biological in the form of what? Trees, right? Trees, and again, this is something that's often overlooked. It's obvious, but it's not obvious. If you don't understand that biology stores an enormous amount of water, then you might not even consider these.
Green.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you might not even consider this to be worth paying attention to, but this is one of your most important storages. What's another storage? Soil. Okay, soil is another massively important storage. It's actually your cheapest. It's your cheapest storage. And your ability to improve soil as a means of storage is entirely dependent on how well it's been conditioned and the quality of it. Specifically, the percentage of soil organic matter, how much carbon is in soil, how much, what composition or percentage of the soil is organic matter. That's what determines how much water you're able to store. And we'll take a look at more the specific information with regard to that in the soils portion. Next. Third principle, start small and simple. Small and simple.